Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story one summer had been treating me pretty well. School was finally over, which meant I had more free time than I knew what to do with. For once, nobody was telling me to wake up early, finish homework, study for a test, or sit in a classroom pretending to care about something I would forget the moment the bell rang. I could do whatever I wanted. Go to a friend's house at 1 in the afternoon and stay there until it got dark. Sure, watch movies until I passed out on the couch with a bag of chips resting on my chest. I had already done that more than once. Spend an entire day switching between games, social media, random videos, and food without doing anything useful? That had basically become my routine. I had been using my freedom to chase as much easy happiness as possible. Every day was about doing whatever made me feel good in the moment. It honestly seemed ridiculous that schools only gave us 2 months of this. After surviving an entire year of early mornings, boring assignments, and teachers acting like every deadline was a matter of life and death, 2 months did not feel like enough. That afternoon, I had just come home from a pool party. Usually, coming home after hanging out with friends would have felt good. I would have been tired, sunburned, and ready to relax. But instead, I felt impatient. The party had been the last planned event on my calendar for a while. Now, I had nothing. For the next couple of weeks, I would probably sit around the house, stare at my phone, and wait for something interesting to happen. Maybe Josh and I could finally make a decent short film. We had been talking about doing that for months. Josh was the one who always said he wanted to work in movies someday. He talked about directing, writing, camera angles, lighting, and all that serious film stuff. The funny part was that I was usually the one who actually wanted to keep working once we started. Every time we tried to film something, Josh got distracted. We would spend 20 minutes setting up a shot, then he would decide we needed snacks. After that, we would walk to Circle K, even though it was 20 minutes away. By the time we got back, we would sit down to eat and watch videos. Then, one of us would suggest playing a game. The movie would be forgotten before we filmed the second scene. It was annoying, but I did not care that much. We still had fun. That was mostly what summer was about anyway. Still, there were only so many times I could waste an entire day before the boredom started feeling heavy. I wanted something interesting to happen. I did not care what it was. I wanted some kind of story. Something I could tell people later. Instead, I spent the rest of the day doing nothing. I sat on the couch and watched videos I did not even enjoy. I opened the same apps over and over again, hoping something new would appear. I ate even though I was not hungry. I messaged Josh, but he was busy with his family. At one point, I considered going outside. Then I remembered it was hot. So I stayed inside. Time passed in the slowest way possible. Minutes became hours, and before I knew it, the sunlight outside had disappeared. The house grew quiet. My parents had already gone to bed, and the only light downstairs came from the television. I finally decided I was tired enough to sleep. I went upstairs, changed into an old shirt and shorts, then fell into bed without even checking my phone. The air in my room was warm, but the fan made it comfortable enough. I closed my eyes. For the next 3 hours, everything was normal. Nothing happened. No strange noises, no nightmares, no shadows moving across the wall. Just 3 peaceful hours of sleep. Then I woke up because I had to pee. My eyes opened slowly. The room was completely dark except for a small amount of moonlight coming through the curtains. The fan pushed warm air around the room. For a moment, I considered ignoring the pressure in my bladder and going back to sleep. I was comfortable. My body felt heavy, and my pillow was cool beneath my face. But the need to pee kept getting worse. I groaned, pushed the blanket away, and stood up. The hallway outside my room was dark. I did not turn on the light because I knew the house well enough to walk through it without seeing. I had done the same thing many times before. I went downstairs because the upstairs bathroom was beside my parents' bedroom, and I did not want to wake them. The stairs creaked beneath my feet. The house felt different at night. During the day, it was ordinary. At night, every room looked larger. Every dark doorway seemed deeper than it should have been. The furniture became strange shapes, and the silence made every small sound feel important. Still half asleep, I reached the downstairs bathroom and closed the door. A few minutes later, I stepped back into the hallway. That was when I realized something. I did not have my phone. I patted my pockets even though I knew it was not there. "Shit," I whispered. I had probably left it somewhere downstairs before going to bed. I did not actually need it. There was no reason I had to find it at that moment. I could have waited until morning. But I hated not knowing where it was. I depended on that phone more than I wanted to admit. Even when I was not using it, I needed to know it was nearby. The thought of leaving it somewhere made me feel uncomfortable. The living room and kitchen were the only places I could have left it. I walked into the living room and felt around the couch. Nothing. I checked between the cushions. Nothing. I searched the coffee table, the floor, and the chair beside the television. Still nothing. Maybe I had left it in the kitchen. I walked in and checked the counter. The kitchen was almost completely dark, but the green numbers on the microwave clock gave off enough light for me to see the basic shapes around me. I looked near the sink. No phone. I checked the kitchen table. Nothing. I started feeling annoyed. Maybe I was just an idiot and had left it in my bedroom after all. Maybe I had looked directly at it before going to sleep and somehow forgotten. I stood there, trying to remember. Had I been holding it when I went upstairs? Had I placed it on the couch? Had I charged it? The more I thought about it, the less certain I became. Maybe I had some kind of temporary amnesia. Before I could solve the mystery, the power went out. The microwave clock disappeared. The refrigerator stopped humming. The fan upstairs became silent. Everything died at once. The darkness became complete. I froze for a second. There had been no lights on, so the change should not have felt dramatic. But it did. The house suddenly felt dead. Without the refrigerator, fans, and other machines running, the silence became much deeper. I waited for the power to return. It did not. This was not exactly unusual. Our house had been having electrical problems for the past few weeks. The same thing had happened years earlier, and my parents had paid someone to fix it. Apparently, they had not done a very good job. Recently, Dad had figured out that if he went to the circuit breaker and moved a few switches, the power usually came back. The breaker was in the basement. I did not want to go down there. Not because I thought it was haunted or anything. I just hated the basement. It was small, crowded, dusty, and full of things nobody used anymore. But I wanted the fan back on. I also wanted enough light to find my phone. So, like the responsible member of society I clearly was, I decided to deal with it myself. I walked carefully toward the basement door, keeping one hand against the wall. The door was near the kitchen. I found the handle, opened it, and stared down into darkness. A cold smell rose from below. The basement steps were narrow and made of unfinished wood. Each one made a loud creak as I stepped down. Halfway to the bottom, I remembered that we kept a flashlight somewhere down there. The problem was finding it. The basement was packed with shelves, cardboard boxes, old chairs, broken tools, and random objects my parents refused to throw away. I reached the bottom and stretched my hands out in front of me. The darkness was so thick that I could not even see my own fingers. I moved slowly, touching shelves and boxes, until my hand finally hit something metal. I felt around and found the flashlight. For a moment, I worried the batteries would be dead. I pressed the button. A weak beam of white light appeared. Thank God, I muttered. The flashlight was not bright, but it was enough. I moved the beam around the room. Dust floated through the light. Old boxes were stacked nearly to the ceiling. A broken table leaned against one wall. Plastic containers filled the shelves, most of them covered in dirt. I had not been in the basement for a long time. That was when I noticed the smell. It was horrible. I had noticed something bad when I opened the door, but down here it was much stronger. The air smelled wet, rotten, and sour. It reminded me of spoiled meat mixed with dirty water. I covered my nose with my shirt. How has nobody noticed this? I whispered. Maybe something had died down there. A rat could have gotten trapped behind a shelf. Or maybe someone had left food in one of the boxes years ago. The smell made me want to go back upstairs, but I still needed to fix the power. I found the breaker panel on the wall and opened it. I had watched my father do this before, but I did not remember exactly what he had touched. I moved a couple of switches, waited, then moved another. The lights above me flickered. The basement bulb came on. Upstairs, I heard the refrigerator start humming again. The power was back. I should have left. The problem had been fixed. There was no reason to stay. But the smell bothered me. Now that I had light, I wanted to find where it was coming from. I walked around the basement, moving between the shelves and boxes. I checked under the old table. I looked behind the containers. I searched for a dead animal. The smell became stronger near the back corner. One wooden shelf stood against the far wall. At first, it looked normal. It held a few empty boxes, a broken radio, and some old jars. But as I moved closer, I noticed that the wood was wet. I touched the side of it. The surface felt soft and damp. The basement was not humid. The walls around it were dry. There was no pipe nearby that could have been leaking. I leaned closer. The smell was almost unbearable there. It felt like it was coming from behind the shelf. I aimed the flashlight around the sides, but could not see anything. Maybe a rat had died between the shelf and the wall. I grabbed the side of the shelf and pulled. It was heavier than I expected. The legs scraped loudly across the concrete floor. I moved it a few inches, then stopped. There was a dark gap behind it. I pulled again. The shelf shifted farther away from the wall. Then I saw the hole. For several seconds, my brain refused to understand what I was looking at. Part of the basement wall had been destroyed. The bricks had been broken and pushed aside, creating an opening large enough for a person to crawl through. Behind the bricks was dirt. Someone had dug a tunnel straight into the ground. I stared at it. The darkness inside swallowed the flashlight beam after only a few feet. I stepped closer. The edges of the hole looked rough, but it did not seem new. The dirt around it was packed down, as though something had moved through the tunnel many times. There was no way to tell how far it went. It could have ended after 10 feet. It could have stretched for miles. I stood there, trying to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe the house had some old underground structure. Maybe it connected to a storm drain. Maybe previous owners had built it for some reason. None of those ideas made sense. The tunnel was too uneven and narrow to be part of the house. It looked like something had clawed its way through the dirt. The smell poured from the opening. Every sensible part of my mind told me to leave. I should have gone upstairs. I should have woken my parents. I should have called the police. I should have covered the hole and never gone near it again. I knew that. I am not a smart person, but I am smart enough to know that nobody should enter a secret tunnel hidden behind a shelf in their basement. I was tired. I was not brave. I was not some hero from a movie. I got average grades in school. I spent most of my time staring at my phone. I avoided exercise whenever possible. There was nothing about me that suggested I should explore a dark underground tunnel alone in the middle of the night. But something inside me wanted to go. The feeling did not seem natural. It was like a quiet voice that appeared in the back of my mind. It did not speak in words. It pulled. It made me believe there was something inside the tunnel meant specifically for me. Maybe I would discover something incredible. Maybe I would solve a mystery. Maybe I would find something that would change my life. I tightened my grip on the flashlight. "I'll only look for a minute," I whispered. I had the flashlight. I knew where the exit was. I would stay close to the basement. If the tunnel became dangerous, I would turn around. I knew my limits. At least, that was what I told myself. I lowered my body and crawled through the broken wall. The tunnel was just tall enough for me to crouch. The dirt beneath my feet felt soft and wet. The walls pressed close on both sides. The smell became worse with every step. I pointed the flashlight ahead. The beam showed nothing except packed soil and stones. Small roots hung from the ceiling. I moved slowly. After a few feet, I looked back. The basement light was still visible through the opening. That made me feel safer. I kept going. The tunnel bent slightly to the left. When I turned the corner, the basement disappeared from view. I stopped. This was far enough. I should have turned around. Instead, I continued. The walls began to change. Strange, wet patches covered the dirt. At first, I thought it was mud. Then I touched one by accident. It was thick and sticky. I pulled my hand back quickly. A clear, slimy substance stretched between my fingers and the wall. It looked like mucus, like a giant trail of snot. I wiped my hand on my shorts and tried not to think about where it had come from. The farther I went, the more of it I saw. It covered parts of the walls and ceiling. In some places, it dripped onto the ground. The tunnel seemed alive. That thought entered my mind, and I could not get rid of it. The walls did not move, but the slime made them shine in the flashlight beam. The dirt seemed to breathe around me. My chest tightened. The air was getting harder to breathe. The smell was so strong that my eyes watered. I decided I was going back. Then I saw an opening ahead. The tunnel widened into a larger underground space. It looked like a small cave or animal burrow. The floor dropped slightly, and the ceiling rose high enough for me to stand. I stepped inside. The smell hit me so hard that I almost threw up. It smelled like thousands of dead bodies left to rot for years. The mucus covered everything. Thick strings of it hung from the ceiling. Large, wet piles sat along the walls. The dirt had turned into a dark, soft mud. Every step made a sucking sound. I lifted my flashlight. Something was crouched in the back corner. At first, I thought it was a pile of clothes. Then it moved. The figure slowly raised its head. It was my mother. At least, it looked like her. It was naked. Its skin was pale and wet. Sweat covered its body, and its hair was stuck to its face. Thick pieces of blood clung to the strands. It was crouched low, with its knees pressed against its chest. Its arms seemed too long. Its fingers rested in the mud. Then, it looked directly at me. Its eyes were completely white. There were no pupils, no color, only two smooth white surfaces staring from my mother's face. Every part of my body screamed at me to run. I wanted to wake up. I wanted a gun to appear in my hand. I wanted to shoot the thing. I wanted to shoot myself if that was the only way to escape being in the same world as it. But I could not move. My body became hard and still. The flashlight shook in my hand, but my feet refused to step back. The creature smiled. It used my mother's smile. "Honey," it said, "it's okay." Its voice was perfect. It sounded exactly like her. Not close, not similar. Perfect. The same gentle tone she used when I was sick. The same way she stretched certain words. The same small breath between sentences. "It's okay," it repeated. "It's okay. You don't need to go anywhere." The voice sounded kind, but something underneath it felt wrong. There was sarcasm in it. There was enjoyment. The creature knew I was terrified. "It's me," it said. "It's Mom." It slowly stood. Its back made a soft cracking sound as it straightened. It was taller than my mother, much taller. Its head nearly touched the ceiling. "Tori," it said, "you're acting strange again. Did you forget to get a good night's sleep?" I stared into its white eyes. I did not want to look at them, but I could not turn away. My throat felt dry. "You aren't my mom," I said. The words came out weak. The creature tilted its head. "Where is my mom?" I asked. It smiled wider. "You're being silly again, sweetie. I am Mom. I am Julia Hubert." That was my mother's name. The creature took one slow step toward me. Its foot sank into the mud. "You need to take your medication, Tori. I don't have medication." The smile disappeared for a second. Then it returned. "That's okay," it said. "You don't need to rush. Don't you remember me?" I did not answer. "I'm your mom," it continued. "Remember last week when we went to my friend's house? You played Pictionary the whole time." A cold feeling moved through me. That had happened. My mother had taken me to her friend's house the week before. I had been bored, so I played Pictionary with her friend's kids. I had not told anyone about it. Maybe my father knew. Maybe Josh knew. But this thing should not have known. The creature took another step. The light from my flashlight moved over its body. There were dark marks beneath its skin, like something was crawling through its veins. "This isn't real," I whispered. The creature leaned forward. "That isn't my mom. Remember, Tori?" it asked. Its voice became softer. "Remember? I wanted to say no. I wanted to run. But the memory felt clear. I could see the kitchen table at my mother's friend's house. I could see the paper. I could remember drawing a terrible picture of a dog while everyone guessed the wrong answers. We did it. right? The creature asked. It stepped closer. It happened, right, Tori? My thoughts became slow. The cave seemed to move around me. The smell stopped bothering me. The mucus on the walls no longer looked disgusting. The thing's face looked more like my mother with every second. Her cheeks, her mouth, the small line beside her nose. Maybe I was confused. Maybe I had walked into the basement because I was sleepwalking. Maybe this was a dream. Maybe my mother had come to find me. It did, I said. The creature smiled. That's right. Its voice was warm now. You remember. It reached one hand toward me. The fingers were too long, but that detail no longer seemed important. Come here, it said. I wanted to step back. Instead, I moved closer. The white eyes seemed brighter. You've been having trouble again, it told me. You've been forgetting things. Its hand touched my cheek. The skin was cold and wet. I flinched. Mom? Yes, honey, the word felt safe. For 1 second, I believed it. Then I noticed something hanging from the creature's wrist. A silver bracelet. My mother wore the same one almost every day. But this bracelet was broken. Dried blood covered the chain. I had seen my mother wearing it during dinner, only a few hours earlier. My mind cleared. I looked at the thing's face. The features were still hers, but they no longer fit together correctly. The mouth was too wide. The skin around the eyes was stretched. Its neck bent at an angle no human neck should be able to bend. I stepped back. The creature's fingers tightened against my cheek. You remember, it said. The friendly tone disappeared. Its voice became deeper. You said you remembered. I pulled away. Its nails cut my skin. Warm blood ran down my face. I raised the flashlight and struck it across the head. The metal casing hit with a wet crack. The creature screamed. The sound did not resemble my mother anymore. It was loud enough to shake dirt from the ceiling. I turned and ran. Behind me, the creature began laughing. My mother's voice returned. Tori. I pushed through the tunnel. My shoes slipped in the mud. The flashlight beam bounced wildly across the walls. Tori, come back. The voice sounded angry now. Then it sounded hurt. Why are you running from me? I did not answer. I could hear something moving behind me. It crawled fast. Its hands and feet slapped against the wet ground. I forced myself forward. The tunnel seemed longer than before. The walls pressed closer. The slime touched my arms and face. Tori. The voice came from directly behind me. I did not look back. I reached the turn in the tunnel. The basement light appeared ahead. For 1 second, hope filled me. Then the power went out again. The opening vanished. I crashed into the wall. The flashlight slipped from my hand and landed in the dirt. Its beam pointed behind me. I looked. The creature was crawling through the tunnel. Its body bent in impossible ways. Its arms stretched ahead of it while its legs dragged behind. My mother's face hung loosely from its head like a mask. The mouth opened. Inside were rows of thin, sharp teeth. I grabbed the flashlight and scrambled forward. I could barely see the basement opening. My hands found the broken bricks. I pulled myself through. Something grabbed my ankle. I screamed and kicked. Long fingers wrapped around my leg. Don't leave your mother, the creature whispered. I kicked again. My heel struck its face. The grip loosened. I crawled into the basement and turned around. The creature remained inside the tunnel. Only its head and one arm were visible. It stared at me with those white eyes. You'll remember soon, it said. Then It pulled itself backward into the darkness. I grabbed the shelf and pushed it in front of the hole. My arms shook so badly that I could barely move it. When the opening was covered, I ran upstairs. The power returned the moment I reached the kitchen. Every light in the house came on. The microwave beeped. The refrigerator hummed. The television turned on by itself. For a moment, I stood in the kitchen, breathing hard. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. My mother appeared in the doorway. She wore a robe and looked half asleep. "Tori?" she asked. "What are you doing?" I stared at her. Her eyes were normal. Her skin was dry. The silver bracelet was still around her wrist. She noticed the blood on my face. "Oh my God," she said. "What happened to you?" I stepped away from her. She looked confused. Then she raised one hand. "Sweetie, it's okay." My stomach turned. She took another step. "It's me," she said. "It's Mom." I looked at her bracelet. The chain was broken. A small drop of blood slid from beneath it. Behind us, from somewhere deep below the house, something began knocking against the basement wall. 3 slow knocks. My mother smiled. "Don't you remember me, Tori?" Story 2. Allison was only 13 years old. She was just a child who wanted someone to play with. She had no idea that a simple game would trap her inside something that had no real beginning and no proper end. Whatever happened to her destroyed the future she should have had and left her trapped inside an endless loop. At least, that is what I believe now. At the time, I did not know Allison's name. I did not know that she existed, and I certainly did not know that she was waiting inside my game. It all started when I went to visit one of my friends. We both enjoyed video games, especially older Nintendo games. I had mentioned several times that I wanted to play The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask on the Nintendo 3DS, but I had never bought it for myself. My friend decided to surprise me. When I arrived at his house, he handed me a copy of Majora's Mask and told me that he had bought it for me. I was excited. I had played other Zelda games before, and I already knew a little about Majora's Mask. I knew that the game followed Link as he became trapped in the land of Termina. I also knew about the 3-day cycle and the moon falling toward Clocktown. The time loop was part of the game. That is important. At first, everything seemed completely normal. My friend opened the game and let me begin playing on his Nintendo 3DS. I created a save file and started the story. Skull Kid stole Link's horse and the Ocarina of Time. Link followed him into a strange place where he was transformed into a Deku Scrub. Nothing about it seemed unusual. The graphics looked fine. The music sounded exactly as I expected. The characters behaved normally. Even the strange atmosphere of Clocktown felt like part of the game. I spent a while exploring, speaking to characters, and learning how everything worked. Eventually, I reached the point where Link faced Skull Kid on top of the clock tower. I got the ocarina back from him. The plan was simple. I had to play the Song of Time and return to the beginning of the 3-day cycle. When Link held the ocarina, a memory appeared. Princess Zelda stood with him in Hyrule. She gave him the instrument and taught him the Song of Time before Link rode away on his horse. I had seen clips of the scene before, so I did not think anything was wrong. When the memory ended, I returned to the clock tower and fought Skull Kid. I lost. The moon crashed down, and everything was destroyed. Then the memory of Princess Zelda started playing again. I watched Link receive the ocarina. Zelda taught him the Song of Time. Link rode away on Epona. The game returned me to the fight. I tried again. I lost again. The same Zelda scene played once more. At first, I assumed that this was normal. Maybe the scene replayed each time the player failed. It seemed a little unnecessary, but I had not played the game before, so I did not question it. I fought Skull Kid again. Once again, I failed. Princess Zelda appeared. She gave Link the ocarina. She taught him the song. He rode away. The repetition started to annoy me. I continued trying. Every time I died, the same scene played from the beginning. I could not skip it. I pressed every button, but nothing worked. After a while, the scene began to feel different. Princess Zelda seemed to pause before giving Link the ocarina. Her eyes stayed on him for a little longer than they had before. When she spoke, the music became quieter, and I thought I heard a faint sound under her voice. It sounded like a child whispering. I could not understand what the voice was saying. I held the console closer to my ear, but the whisper disappeared beneath the music. I told myself that I was imagining it. Eventually, I managed to continue through the game. I explored more of Termina and completed several parts of the story. The strange loop seemed to stop, and the game returned to normal. I relaxed. My friend had left the room earlier to help someone downstairs. When he came back, he sat beside me and watched for a few minutes. Then he said that he wanted a turn. I handed him the 3DS. He played for a long time. At first, I sat beside him and watched. After a while, I became bored and started looking at my phone. Later, I went downstairs to get something to eat. By the time I returned, he had progressed much farther than I expected. I do not know exactly how long he played, but it must have been several hours. Eventually, he gave the console back to me. He said he wanted to go outside and get some fresh air. He told me that he would return soon. There was something strange about the way he spoke. He looked tired, but not in the normal way. His face seemed pale, and he avoided looking directly at the console. I asked him whether everything was okay. He said he was fine. Then he left. When I continued playing, I noticed that he had reached an area that looked like Ikana Castle. I knew that this was a later part of the game, but I did not know enough about it to understand exactly what he had completed. Link was standing in a dark stone room. There was a treasure chest in front of him. I walked toward it and opened it. The moment the chest opened, the game froze. The music stopped. For several seconds, nothing moved. Link stood in front of the open chest while the room remained completely silent. Then the screen flashed white. When the image returned, Princess Zelda was standing behind Link. I turned the character around. She was only a few steps away. That did not make sense. Princess Zelda was not supposed to be in Termina. She was only supposed to appear in Link's memory. As far as I knew, she did not walk around inside the game, and she definitely did not chase the player. But when I moved Link away from her, she followed. At first, she walked slowly. Her head remained lowered, and her arms hung at her sides. Her feet moved, but the rest of her body stayed unnaturally still. I moved Link through a doorway. Zelda followed me. I ran down a corridor. She began running, too. Her movement looked wrong. Her legs moved too quickly while her upper body remained straight. She seemed to glide across the ground, getting closer every second. I felt my hands becoming sweaty around the 3DS. I tried attacking her, but my sword passed through her body. She did not react. She continued chasing me. I ran through several rooms and finally managed to get far enough away that she disappeared. I waited for her to return, but nothing happened. The game continued as if the chase had never occurred. I should have stopped playing then. Instead, I convinced myself that my friend had somehow activated a glitch. Maybe the game had loaded Princess Zelda's model by mistake. Games sometimes behaved strangely, especially after being played for several hours. I continued. Later, I learned the Elegy of Emptiness. The song created a statue that looked like Link, allowing me to hold down switches and solve puzzles. The statue was already disturbing. Its empty smile and lifeless eyes made me uncomfortable, but I knew it belonged in the game. I created the statue and used it to complete the puzzles. Everything seemed normal again. Eventually, I reached a boss fight. Before I could attack or even understand what was happening, Link suddenly fell to the ground. There was no enemy near him. His health had been full. The screen faded to black. Then the game crashed. The 3DS returned to its home screen. I stared at it for a moment. By then, I was becoming nervous, but I still did not want to believe that anything impossible was happening. I reopened the game. The title screen loaded normally. Then I reached the save menu. There were 3 files. I had only created one. The first file was named Save US. The second file was named Allison. The third file was named Give Up. I stared at the names. My original save file was gone. I immediately thought that my friend had done it. He had played while I was not paying attention. Maybe he had created the files as a joke. He enjoyed trying to scare people, and this seemed like something he might do. Still, the names made me uneasy. Who was Allison? Was she a character from the game that I had forgotten about? Was Allison the name of a hacker? Was it some kind of online prank? I called my friend. He answered after several rings. I asked him whether he had created the extra save files. He sounded confused. He said he had only used my original file. He claimed that he had never created another save and had not changed the file name. I accused him of lying. He became defensive and told me that he had no reason to lie. Then, he asked whether anything strange had happened after he left. I told him about Princess Zelda chasing me. There was silence on the other end of the call. I asked him again whether he had done something to the game. He said no. Before ending the call, he told me not to open the file named Allison. That made me even more suspicious. I asked him why. He said he did not know. He only had a bad feeling about it. Then he hung up. Of course, telling me not to open the file made me want to open it even more. I selected Allison. The game loaded inside the clock tower. The Happy Mask salesman stood in front of Link. He looked normal, but there was no music playing. The room was completely silent except for the sound of Link's footsteps. I walked toward the salesman and spoke to him. Instead of normal dialogue, the screen displayed several pictures. The first picture was a family photograph. It showed 2 parents standing with a young girl between them. The photograph looked old and faded, but it did not look like it belonged in a Zelda game. It looked like a real photograph that someone had scanned and placed inside the software. The little girl appeared to be around 12 or 13. Someone had scratched out her face. Deep white lines covered her eyes, nose, and mouth. The damage looked violent, as if someone had repeatedly dragged a sharp object across the picture. The next image showed a bedroom at night. The room was dark, but I could make out a bed, a small desk, and several toys on the floor. A girl was sitting on the edge of the bed with her back facing the camera. Her face was not visible. There was a tall silhouette standing behind her. The figure was darker than the rest of the room. It seemed to have a human shape, but its arms were too long. One hand reached toward the girl's shoulder. Another picture appeared. It showed water, nothing else. The image looked as though it had been taken from beneath the surface of a lake. Light came down from above, and something pale floated near the top. I could not tell whether it was clothing or a body. Then the screen returned to the game. The happy masked salesman was gone. I quickly left the file. My heart was beating hard. I told myself that the photographs were part of some hidden horror modification. Maybe my friend had bought a hacked copy without realizing it. Still, I had never heard of a 3DS game being changed like that. I returned to the save menu and selected Save US. The game loaded from the place where it had crashed. Link stood inside the boss room, but the boss was gone. I walked through the exit and continued until the game suddenly skipped forward. Scenes passed quickly, and I found myself near the ending. Clocktown was empty. There were no people in the streets. The music played too slowly, as though the game were struggling to remember the correct speed. The moon was still above the town, but its face was different. Its mouth was open. Its eyes were closed. I made my way to the clock tower. Princess Zelda was standing on top of it. That was impossible, but by then, I was no longer surprised. I walked toward her and pressed the button to speak. A message appeared. The smartest begin on this site. Sheep with no intellect ask about it. Save US. I read the sentence several times. It made no sense. Before I could press another button, Princess Zelda lifted her head. Her eyes were completely black. Dark liquid began running down her cheeks like tears. It dripped from her face and disappeared into her dress. The screen went black. For several seconds, I heard nothing. Then, the sound of distant waves began playing through the speakers. The waves grew louder and louder. Words slowly appeared in the middle of the screen. Do my parents miss me? The sentence disappeared. Another one replaced it. I was looking for a friend. I'm just 13. I felt cold. Then the final message appeared. Pile with me. The letters were uneven, with random capital letters mixed into the sentence. All the sound suddenly stopped. The silence lasted only a second. A scream exploded from the 3DS speakers. I nearly dropped the console. Princess Zelda's face filled the screen in a sudden jump scare. Her mouth was open too wide, and her eyes were empty black holes. The image disappeared. A new message appeared. I'm Allison. Princess Zelda appeared in the distance, standing in complete darkness. She vanished. Another jump scare filled the screen. This time, her eyes were black with small red irises in the center. Bloody tears ran down her face. She wore a horrible smile that stretched farther than a human mouth should be able to stretch. Her body twisted and glitched. Parts of her arms and face disappeared and returned in the wrong places. Words flashed over the image. I will drown you. The game returned me to the save menu. My hands were shaking. I wanted to turn off the console, but one file remained. Give up. I selected it. The game loaded immediately. A young version of Princess Zelda appeared on the screen. She looked more like a child than she had in the other files. For a moment, she stared directly toward the camera. Then text appeared beneath her. Never come back. The 3DS turned off. The screen became completely black. I pressed the power button, but nothing happened. I plugged in the charger, although I knew the battery had not been low. The charging light came on, but the system still would not start. I could not understand what had happened. I checked the time and realized that it was very late. My friend still had not returned, and he was no longer answering his phone. I decided that I would deal with everything in the morning. I placed the 3DS on a table and went to sleep. That night, I dreamed about Allison. I was standing beside a lake. The sky was gray, and the water was completely still. There were no trees, houses, or roads around me. There was only the lake and a narrow wooden dock. A young girl stood at the end of the dock. Her back was turned toward me. She wore a dress similar to Princess Zelda's clothes, but it was wet and covered in mud. Her dark hair hung down her back. I knew it was Allison. I called her name. She turned around. Her face was blurred, as though someone had rubbed it away. She reached out and grabbed both of my arms. Her fingers were freezing. Before I could pull away, she dragged me toward the edge of the dock. She was much stronger than a 13-year-old girl should have been. I begged her to stop. She began laughing. The laugh sounded like the broken music from the game. Then she pushed me into the lake. The water closed over my head. It was so cold that I could not breathe. I tried swimming toward the surface, but something held my legs. I looked down and saw Allison beneath me. Her hair floated around her face. Her black eyes stared up at me. She opened her mouth and released a stream of bubbles. Then she pulled me deeper. My lungs began burning. I tried to scream, but water filled my mouth. It felt completely real. I woke up suddenly, covered in sweat and gasping for air. My throat hurt, and my chest felt heavy. For several seconds, I truly believed that I had drowned. The room was dark. The 3DS was still on the table. Its screen was glowing. I had not turned it on. I got out of bed and slowly walked toward it. The save menu was open. Only one file remained. Give up. I knew I should not touch it. Allison had warned me never to return. Everything inside me told me to shut the system off and throw it away. But curiosity was stronger than fear. I picked up the 3DS and selected the file. The screen turned black. Nothing happened for several seconds. Then the game crashed again. A message appeared across the screen. Never come back. The system returned to the menu. I tried opening the file again. The same message appeared. Never come back. I tried once more. The message appeared again, but this time I heard water moving beneath it. Then I heard a young girl crying. I shut the system off. I placed it inside a drawer and covered it with clothes. I told myself that I only had to wait until morning. In daylight, everything would seem less frightening. My friend would return, and we would find a logical explanation. Maybe the game was damaged. Maybe the system had been hacked. Maybe someone had created Allison as part of an elaborate prank. I returned to bed, but I could not sleep. Every few minutes, I heard a faint sound coming from inside the drawer. At first, it sounded like the game's music. Then it began to sound like someone tapping from the other side of a wall. 3 slow taps. A pause. 3 more taps. I stared at the drawer until the sound stopped. Then a girl whispered from inside it. Play with me. I did not move. A few seconds later, the drawer slowly began to open by itself. Story 3. I have painted lines on county roads for 11 years. Center lines, edge lines, turning arrows, stop bars, railroad warnings, and school crosswalks before classes begin in August. If there is paint on a public road in this county, there is a good chance I either put it there or worked with the person who did. Most people never think about road markings. They see a yellow line or a white line and follow it without asking how it got there. They do not think about the machine, the paint temperature, the air pressure, or the tiny glass beads that make the lines shine at night. People assume the paint itself reflects their headlights. It does not. The reflection comes from glass beads. There's a hopper mounted behind the paint guns on the striping truck. As the guns spray wet paint onto the asphalt, the hopper drops thousands of tiny beads over the fresh line. The beads sink halfway into the paint and stay exposed on top. When headlights strike them, they throw the light back toward the driver. That is why a newly painted line glows so brightly at night. It is not the paint. It is the glass. We usually work after dark because traffic is lighter and the asphalt is cooler. Paint behaves better when the surface is not burning hot from the sun. The truck moves slowly, usually around 4 miles per hour, with the striping carriage lowered close to the road. The compressor runs constantly. The paint guns spray beneath the truck, and the bead hopper rattles behind them. 4 miles per hour feels painfully slow when you are driving a normal vehicle. In a striping truck, it feels normal. The work is boring, and I like boring. I have never wanted excitement from a job. I do not need surprises. I do not want every shift to become a story I can tell at a bar. I want to show up, inspect the truck, load the paint, follow the work order, and come home when the job is finished. There is comfort in repetition. You watch the pointer mounted near the front bumper. You line it up with the center of the road. You keep your speed steady. You listen to the compressor, because after enough years, you can hear a pressure problem before the gauge shows it. You watch the spray pattern. You check the mirrors. You make sure the bead flow is even. Then you keep going. Some nights I do not say 10 words to another person. That suits me perfectly. I know every public road in this county. I have driven all of them in darkness, rain, fog, summer heat, and freezing weather. I know where the shoulders disappear. I know which curves collect gravel after storms. I know where deer cross at night and where drunk drivers usually leave the pavement. I know which roads flood. I know which bridges shake. I know which intersections people misunderstand, no matter how many signs the county installs. There are roads I could drive with the headlights off. I would never do that, of course, but I could. The work order that started all of this came through dispatch like any other assignment. There was nothing strange about the paper. It had a print date, a job number, a location, material instructions, and an electronic signature stamp from the engineer's office. The order called for a full center line on a newly paved surface. The starting point was listed as the gravel turnout, just past the old cooperative scales on Route 9. Skip line, 4 inches wide, yellow paint, simple work. The old co-op scales had been closed for years. The building was gone, but the concrete platform and gravel turnout remained. Farmers used the space to turn trailers around, and deputies sometimes parked there at night to watch traffic. I knew the location well. What bothered me was the direction marked on the work order. According to the instructions, the new road began beyond the turnout and headed east through the pine flats. There was no road there. There had never been a road there. Past the scales, the land dropped slightly into a long stretch of pine forest. A power line cut crossed the area several miles out, and beyond that was the reservoir. There were no houses, farms, or public facilities in that direction. Nothing that needed a road. The county had not discussed building one either. Road construction is hard to hide. Survey crews arrive first, then clearing teams, then drainage work, grading, rock, base layers, paving machines, inspections, signs, barrels, and equipment. Even a small road takes time. Someone in our department always knows about it. I considered calling dispatch to ask whether the location had been entered incorrectly. Then I looked at the signature stamp. Stamped work gets paid. That matters more than people like to admit. The county had been cutting overtime, and I had a payment due on my own truck. I figured the new road was part of some quiet utility project or land agreement that had not reached our department yet. It was not my job to question the engineer's office. It was my job to paint the line. I arrived at the turnout shortly after midnight. The night was hot and heavy, the way July nights often are here. The air smelled like pine sap, dust, and distant water. Route 9 was empty except for my truck and the orange flashers reflecting off the road signs. At first, I thought I had missed the entrance. Then my headlights moved across it. A new strip of black asphalt left Route 9 and ran directly into the trees. I stopped at the turnout and stared. The pavement looked fresh, not just recently built, but almost new enough to shine. It was black as the bottom of a cast iron skillet, smooth and clean, without cracks, tire marks, or dirt. There were no painted lines. There were also no construction signs. No cones, no barrels, no survey stakes, no equipment, no warning that the road was closed. Nothing. Newly paved county roads usually sit for days or weeks before we stripe them. During that time, they are surrounded by barrels and signs. There are machines parked along the shoulder and temporary markings sprayed on the surface. This road was simply open. It ran into the darkness as if it had always been there. I should have called it in. That is the part I replay most often. I had a radio. I had a phone. I could have contacted dispatch and asked for confirmation. I could have turned around and gone back to the yard. I could have refused the assignment until someone explained where the road had come from. Instead, I checked the work order one more time. The starting point matched. The instructions were clear. The signature was valid. I positioned the truck at the beginning of the pavement, lowered the striping carriage, opened the paint valves, and started working. The guns began spraying yellow paint. The bead hopper rattled behind them. The fresh center line appeared beneath my truck. For the first several minutes, nothing seemed wrong. The road was narrow but smooth. The shoulders were unfinished, just packed soil and pine needles. The trees stood close on both sides, forming a dark wall beyond the reach of the work lights. I kept the truck at 4 miles per hour. The center line was supposed to be a skip pattern, so the control system painted 10 feet, stopped for 30 feet. Then, painted again. Yellow dashes appeared behind me in a perfect sequence. Paint gap, I watched the pointer. I listened to the compressor. I let the job become boring. Then I noticed that the road never curved. County roads curve constantly. They bend around hills, follow old property lines, cross creeks, avoid rock, and pass around pieces of land that someone refused to sell 50 or 70 years ago. Roads around here are shaped by arguments made by dead people. This one ignored everything. It ran completely straight. No hills, no turns, no intersections, no driveways. Just a narrow strip of black asphalt cutting through the pines as if someone had drawn it with a ruler. I began watching the distance counter. 1 mile passed, then 2, then 3. The road stayed straight. The second unusual thing was the insects. Anyone who works outside at night in July knows what bright lights attract. Moths, beetles, mosquitoes, flies, and every other winged thing in the county will throw itself at a light until it dies. On a normal summer night, the windshield of the striping truck becomes covered in insects. Moths circle the headlights. Beetles strike the glass hard enough to sound like thrown gravel. Flying things swarm through the work lights beneath the truck. That night, the glass stayed clean. Not mostly clean, completely clean. Nothing crossed the headlights. Nothing struck the windshield. Nothing moved between the trees. The whole forest seemed empty. I told myself the paint smell was keeping the insects away. I knew that was not true, but it was an explanation. And explanations are useful, even when they are weak. Around 6 miles in, I noticed a dead pine on the left side of the road. Lightning had split the top. A dark burn mark ran down the trunk, and an old wooden deer stand was bolted about 15 feet above the ground. A green ratchet strap wrapped around the tree, stained with mildew. I remembered it because it was the first object I had seen that was not just another pine. 20 minutes later, I saw the same tree again. Same broken top, same black burn mark, same deer stand, same green strap. It stood on the left side of the road in the exact same position. I slowed slightly and watched it pass. For a moment, I wondered whether hunters had built several identical stands. That seemed unlikely, but not impossible. Pine trees all looked similar at night. Old hunting platforms were often made from the same materials. Green straps turned dark with age. I continued painting. 20 minutes later, the tree appeared for a third time. The same lightning wound, the same crooked platform, the same strap hanging loose beneath it. I stopped telling myself that trees looked alike. I checked the odometer. The trip meter showed 14 miles since the turnout. That was impossible. The county was only about 11 miles wide between the old scales and the reservoir. If I had driven 14 miles east in a straight line, I should have been underwater. There was no way around that. The road should have reached the reservoir long before. Instead, it continued ahead of me, perfectly straight, disappearing into the dark. I reached for the radio. "Dispatch. Stripe 2, I said, requesting a location check. No answer came immediately. I tried again. "Dispatch, this is Stripe 2. Can you confirm my current location?" Something came through the speaker. It was not static. Static is random and sharp. It crackles, pops, and breaks apart. This sound was low and slow. It rose and fell. In, out, in, out. It sounded like someone breathing through a thick piece of cloth. I released the button. The breathing continued. I shut off the radio. The cab became quiet except for the engine, compressor, and bead humper. I suddenly felt as though I had been talking too loudly in a place where I was supposed to remain silent. I kept going for another minute. Then the paint pressure gauge moved slightly. It was probably nothing. The needle had not dropped far enough to matter. But my brain needed a normal problem to solve. People think panic makes you run or scream. Sometimes, panic gives you a task. Check the carriage. Inspect the nozzle. Look for a clogged gun. Do something familiar. I shut off the paint guns and stopped the truck. The engine idled. The compressor clicked as the pressure settled. Outside the cab, the darkness seemed thick enough to touch. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped down onto the new asphalt. The air was strangely cool. My boots made almost no sound on the road. I walked toward the striping carriage, checked the paint lines, looked at the spray tips, and inspected the beat hopper. Everything was fine. There had been no problem at all. I stood beside the truck for several seconds, pretending to study the equipment. Then I turned around. The flashers on top of the truck cycled through their pattern, washing the road behind me in orange light. I looked at the center line I had been painting for nearly an hour. The line was old. At first, I thought the lighting was playing tricks on me. I crouched and touched the yellow paint near the truck. It should have been wet. I had sprayed it less than a minute earlier. It was dry. Not recently dry. Old, the yellow had faded to a pale, dirty color. Cracks ran through it. Parts of the line had been worn away where tires had passed over it again and again. I walked several feet back. The glass beads were gone. Farther behind me, the painted dashes were almost invisible. The surface was chalky and weathered, like the line had spent decades beneath traffic, rain, heat, and snow. Paint I had sprayed 40 minutes earlier looked as if it had been dying on that road for 30 years. I stood there staring until the truck's flashers cycled again. Orange light moved across the trees, across the old center line, across something standing far behind me. At first, I thought it was a signpost. Then it moved. A figure was walking along the yellow line. It was too far away for me to see its face or clothing. I could only see a dark human shape at the soft edge of the work lights. It walked slowly, heel to toe, heel to toe. Its arms were held slightly away from its sides for balance, like a drunk driver performing a roadside sobriety test. It placed one bare foot directly in front of the other. It never stepped off the paint. Not once. I did not run. I want credit for that. I wanted to run. Every part of my body told me to leave the truck and sprint into the trees, even though that would have been the stupidest possible choice. Instead, I climbed into the cab. My hands shook so badly that I missed the gear lever the first time. I needed to turn the truck around. A striping truck is not built for quick movements. It is long, heavy, and awkward, with equipment hanging beneath and behind it. The road had no proper shoulder, only loose soil dropping away into the trees. What should have been a 3-point turn became 8 or 9. Forward, reverse, turn, straighten, forward again. The striping carriage scraped across the asphalt with a scream of metal. I did not stop to race it. Each time I shifted into reverse, the mirrors caught the road behind me. The figure was closer, still walking, heel to toe, arms slightly out, never hurrying, never leaving the line. I have spent 11 years driving at 4 miles per hour. I know exactly how fast a person walks. I know how quickly someone should cover 100 yards. That thing was not moving at walking speed. It looked as though it was walking slowly, but every time the flashers came around, the distance between us had been cut nearly in half. By the time I completed the turn, it was close enough for me to see that it was barefoot. Its feet looked pale against the yellow paint. I drove. The truck was not designed for speed, but I pushed it harder than I ever had. The engine roared. The striping carriage bounced and dragged beneath me. Tools rattled in the storage compartments. I watched the road ahead. I refused to look into the mirrors. Then, without warning, I understood. The thought entered my mind fully formed. It was not something I reasoned through. It arrived the way the answer to a joke arrives a second before you laugh. The lines were not made for drivers. They were never meant to guide cars. They were meant to keep something on its route. The old paint behind me had not aged because time was wrong on the road. It had aged because the route was old. Maybe older than the county. Maybe older than paved roads. Someone had built the road over a path that already existed. Someone had ordered me to renew the line. I had given that thing a fresh route to follow. I pressed the accelerator harder. The truck shook violently as the speed climbed. The trees became a dark blur. I passed the lightning-struck pine again. Then again. Then once more. I do not know how many times I saw it. The radio switched itself on. Breathing filled the cab. Slow, deep, closer than before. I pulled the radio microphone from its mount and threw it onto the floor. The breathing continued through the speaker. I drove until my hands hurt from gripping the wheel. Then, suddenly, the trees opened. Route 9 appeared ahead of me. I saw the gravel turnout, the broken concrete of the old co-op scales, the white edge lines on the main road. I crossed my own starting point at nearly 50 miles per hour. The truck swayed as I turned onto Route 9. For half a second, I almost looked into the mirror to see what happened to the road behind me. I did not. I kept my eyes forward. The breathing stopped as soon as I reached the main road. The radio returned to normal. Dispatch called my truck number and demanded to know where I had been all night. I told them I had completed the work order. They asked, what work order? I gave them the job number from memory. Dispatch checked the system. There was no such job. I told them to check again. They did. Nothing, no centerline project near the old scales. No new road, no instruction from the engineer's office, no record that my truck had been assigned anywhere. When I returned to the county yard, the foreman met me near the gate. The truck smelled strongly of yellow traffic paint. The tank level was lower. The bead hopper was almost empty. The carriage had deep scratches along the bottom from the turn. But the mileage log showed distance no one could explain. The foreman inspected my paperwork. The work order was gone. I searched the cab, the dashboard, the floor, and the storage box. Nothing. I knew I had placed it beside the clipboard before leaving. He accused me of taking the truck out without authorization. I told him I had followed a stamped order. He asked me to show it to him. I could not. He sent me for a drug test before sunrise. The test came back clean. For some reason, that made everyone angrier. If the test had shown something, they would have had an answer. I would have been a worker who got high, drove into the woods, wasted county paint, damaged equipment, and invented a story. Instead, I was sober. That left them with questions they did not want. They suspended me for 3 days while they reviewed the truck's tracking system. The GPS data showed that I had left the yard, driven to the old co-op turnout, and then disappeared. Not lost signal. Disappeared for almost 7 hours. The tracker recorded nothing. Then it placed me back at the same turnout shortly before I contacted dispatch. The county blamed faulty equipment. They always blame faulty equipment when the other option makes no sense. That happened 9 days ago. Since then, I have been telling myself things. I am good at that. 11 years of working alone at night teaches you how to talk yourself through dark stretches of road. The work order was a prank. The road was an old logging route I had forgotten. The repeated tree was caused by exhaustion. The paint only looked old because of strange light. The figure was a lost hunter. The radio picked up interference. The GPS failed. The county's records were incomplete. I repeat these explanations whenever the memory begins to feel too real. Sometimes they almost work. For the past 9 days, I have avoided Route 9. I have slept with the bedroom light on. I have checked my driveway every morning before leaving the house. Nothing happened. No strange sounds, no footprints, no figure standing at the edge of the yard. By yesterday, I had almost convinced myself the danger was over. Then I woke up this morning. There was a fresh yellow center line painted down my street. We do not stripe residential roads. There is no reason to. My street is narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass without one pulling partly onto the grass. It is a dead-end road with only 7 houses. The pavement is old and cracked, and the county has refused to repair it for years. There has never been a center line. Until today. The yellow line began at the state road. It ran through the entrance to our neighborhood and continued down the exact middle of the street. 4 inches wide. Straight, bright glass beads scattered evenly across the surface. It was professional work. Good work. The kind of work I would have been proud to sign off on. I stepped outside before sunrise and walked toward it. The paint smell reached me halfway down the driveway. Fresh traffic paint has a sharp chemical odor that stays in your nose for hours. I knew that smell better than the smell of my own home. I crouched beside the line. The paint was still tacky. When I touched it with one finger, yellow paint clung to my skin. Whoever painted it had finished only minutes before I came outside. I looked toward the state road. No truck, no flashers, no equipment. The neighborhood was silent. Then I saw the marks in the line. Footprints, bare footprints. They began where the yellow line entered our street from the state road, 1 foot placed directly in front of the other. Heel to toe, heel to toe. The prints continued down the middle of the road, pressed into the fresh paint. They never moved off the line, not once. I followed them. Past the first house, past the row of mailboxes, past the empty lot where children sometimes play, past every driveway. The prints came all the way down the street. They stopped where the yellow paint stopped, at the foot of my driveway. I stood there for a long time. The final footprint pointed toward my house. There were no prints leading away. The line did not continue up the driveway, but I know why. It is waiting. The route ends where the paint ends. For now. I called the county yard and asked whether anyone had striped a residential street overnight. The dispatcher laughed. Then she realized I was serious. She checked the schedule. No work had been assigned anywhere near my neighborhood. I asked whether any paint had gone missing. She told me she could not discuss county property while I was under review. Then she hung up. I called the sheriff's office. A deputy came out and looked at the line. He took photographs of the footprints and asked whether I had enemies. I told him I did not. He asked whether this could be connected to my suspension. I said maybe. I did not tell him about the road in the pines. I did not tell him about the figure. I did not tell him what the lines were really for. The deputy walked to the final footprint and stared at my house. Then he asked if I had checked beneath my vehicle. I had not. We found yellow paint on the underside of my pickup. 1 long streak, 4 inches wide. It ran from the front bumper to the rear axle. It looked as though the truck had been parked over a wet center line. The deputy asked when I had last driven it. I told him the night before. He said I must have crossed fresh paint somewhere. I told him I had not. He wrote something in his notebook and left. It is dark now. The line outside shines whenever a car passes on the state road. The glass beads catch the headlights, and for a moment, the yellow paint glows all the way to my driveway. I have locked every door and window. I moved a chair against the front door, though I know that will not help. Around midnight, I heard a soft step outside. Then another. Slow, steady, heel to toe. The sound stopped at the foot of my driveway. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. Then I heard scraping. I looked through the upstairs window. Something was kneeling at the end of the yellow line. I could not see its face. It had one hand pressed against the pavement. The other hand moved slowly forward. When it lifted its arm, I saw a small metal spray gun. A yellow line now runs 6 feet up my driveway. It has been growing all night, a few inches at a time. The figure paints, waits for the surface to dry, then moves forward, heel to toe, always on the line. It is halfway to my front door now. I keep telling myself things. The sheriff will return. The sun will rise. The paint will run out. The line will stop. I have been telling myself things for 9 days. But I can hear the bead hopper rattling outside. And the line is getting closer. Story 4. This happened last night. I have not slept since then. I tried lying down when I got home, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt the road moving under me again. I heard those soft impacts beneath the car. I saw the headlights catching small bodies as they ran from the trees. My hands have not stopped shaking. They need something to do. So I am pointing them at a keyboard and writing everything down while I can still remember it clearly. Maybe if I put the whole thing into words, it will feel less real. I had been at a poker night at my friend Eric's house. Nothing unusual happened there. We played cards, drank a few beers, argued about stupid things, and stayed later than we had planned. I stopped drinking a couple of hours before I left because I knew I had a long drive home. The drive usually takes around 40 minutes. Most of it is along a 2-lane state road with thick woods on both sides. There are no streetlights for most of the way, just the white lines, the yellow center line, and the trees closing in around the headlights. I had driven that road hundreds of times. I knew every curve, every hill, and every narrow shoulder. I knew where deer often crossed. I knew where rainwater collected after storms. I knew which turns were sharper than they looked at night. I had never been afraid of that road. On the way home, I stopped at a drive-thru and bought fries. By the time I reached the wooded part of the road, they were already cold. The paper bag sat open on the passenger seat, filling the car with the smell of salt and old cooking oil. It was around 12:30 in the morning. The sky was clear, and the road was empty. The first squirrel ran under my tires about 10 minutes into the drive. I barely saw it. There was a quick shape in the headlights. Then that little thump you feel more than hear. It came up through the floor and into my feet. I winced and tightened my hands on the wheel. "Sorry, buddy," I said. I said it to nobody. It was just one of those things people say when they hit an animal, even though the animal cannot hear them and there is nothing they can do to change what happened. I kept driving. It happens. Animals run into roads at night. Squirrels make bad choices. Maybe it had been confused by the headlights. Maybe it had been running from something smaller, like an owl or a fox. I did not think much about it. The second squirrel appeared around 3 minutes later. This time, I saw it clearly. It shot out of the trees on the left side of the road, crossed the center line, and went directly under the front of my car. The impact made the wheel tremble slightly. "You have got to be kidding me." I said it out loud, and when I heard my own voice, I realized how uneasy I already sounded. 2 squirrels in 3 minutes was unusual. Not impossible, but unusual. I slowed down. I put both hands firmly on the steering wheel and leaned forward, watching the edges of the road. The third squirrel came about 90 seconds later. By then, I was driving around 40 miles per hour. I was ready for it. I was watching the tree line. It still did not matter. The squirrel came out of the darkness so quickly that it looked as if someone had thrown it from the woods. It ran in a perfectly straight line from the left side of the road. I touched the brakes. It did not slow down. It did not change direction. It went under the driver's side tire. Another thump passed through the car. I pulled my foot off the gas and let the car coast. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my throat. My hands had gone cold around the wheel. I remember the exact thought that entered my head. Something is wrong with tonight. I immediately started looking for a normal explanation. That is what the mind does when something feels wrong. It throws explanations at the fear, hoping one of them will fit. Maybe there was a gas leak somewhere in the forest. Maybe flooding had forced the animals out of their burrows. Maybe there was a fire beyond the hills, and the wind had carried the smell ahead of the smoke. Maybe construction equipment or logging machines had disturbed the woods. Those possibilities should have comforted me. They did not. Another part of my mind had already noticed something I did not want to think about. All 3 squirrels had come from the left. They had run out of the trees on the left side of the road, crossed in front of me, and disappeared toward the darkness on the right. After the third one, it stopped being something I could count. 2 squirrels ran across together, then 3 more. A rabbit followed them. Something low and fast rushed beneath the headlights, but I could not tell what it was. It might have been a raccoon. It might have been a fox. None of them reacted to the car. That was the first thing that truly scared me. Anyone who has driven at night knows how animals usually behave around headlights. A squirrel freezes. It turns around. It runs forward, then backward, then forward again in that stupid little panic that seems designed to put it directly under your tires. A rabbit stops and stares. A deer may run alongside the road before suddenly jumping across. Those are frightened animals. They are afraid of the car. The animals that night were not afraid of me. They ran in straight lines. They came out of the trees at full speed and kept moving, even when my headlights hit them. They did not hesitate. They did not turn back. Some ran directly beneath the wheels as if the car was not there at all. They were not scared of the road. They were not scared of the engine. They were scared of the left side of the road. I slowed down to 25 miles per hour. I moved closer to the center line, trying to give them space. The road was empty, so I drove partly in the opposite lane. It did not help. Thump, then another. Thump, thump. Before last night, I would have said that hitting an animal is one terrible moment. It happens, you feel awful, and then you keep driving. It is not one moment when it keeps happening. Each impact travels through the car. You feel it in the steering wheel. You feel it beneath your shoes. You feel the body pass under the front tire, and sometimes you feel it again beneath the back tire. Then the feeling stays somewhere inside you. For the first few animals, I apologized out loud. Sorry, I'm sorry. Oh God, I'm sorry. I said it every time. Then, sometime around the 8th or ninth one, I realized I had stopped speaking. That realization was worse than the sounds. I had become quiet because my mind could no longer react to every death. It had started protecting itself by turning everything into movement and noise. That frightened me. Hitting an animal at 50 miles per hour is mostly a sound. At 25, it becomes a feeling. The front tire rises slightly. Then there is a pause. During that pause, you know the back tire is coming. You know exactly what is about to happen. But there is nothing you can do. Then the second tire passes over it. I began lifting my feet from the floor whenever something went beneath the car, the way a child lifts their legs onto a couch when they are afraid of something under it. I knew it made no difference. I could still feel every impact. The smell of the fries on the passenger seat suddenly became unbearable. I cracked the window, but the night air did not help. The worst part was not even the thump. The worst part was the 2 seconds before it. I would see an animal appear at the edge of the headlights. I would judge its speed without meaning to. I would understand where it was going to meet the car. My mind would do the math. Its speed. My speed. The distance between us. 2 seconds of knowing. 2 seconds of silently begging it to stop. Please don't. Then the front tire. Then the back. At first, I swerved. The first time, I moved too far toward the shoulder. My right tires hit loose gravel, and the car pulled sideways. For 1 second, the trees rushed toward me. I corrected the wheel and got back onto the road. My heart nearly stopped. I understood then that if I kept swerving, I was going to kill myself. There were too many animals. They were coming too quickly. There was no safe direction to move. So I made a choice. I held the wheel straight. I let them come. I have been thinking about that decision all night. I know I had no real choice. I know driving into a tree would not have saved anything. But it still does not feel like an accident. There's a difference between suddenly hitting an animal and seeing one coming, holding the wheel steady, and waiting for the impact. I do not think that difference will ever leave me. Then a rabbit stopped in the middle of my lane. It was the only animal that froze all night. For half a second, it sat directly in the center of the headlights. Its eyes reflected white. It looked at the car. It looked at me. Then it started running again. But it did not turn around. It did not run toward the shoulder. It ran beneath the car. It looked at 2 tons of moving metal and chose the car. After that, I could not ignore what I was seeing. Most of the animals were crossing the road from left to right. They were running as fast as they could, and I happened to be in their path. But some were not simply crossing. Some came out of the tree line at an angle. When I slowed down, their angle changed. When I moved closer to the center of the road, they corrected their direction. I watched one squirrel turn slightly so that it would reach my front tire. It was aiming for the wheel. It was not trying to cross the road. It was trying to get underneath the car. I've spent the entire night trying not to complete the thought that followed. An animal will do almost anything to survive. Survival is not an idea to an animal. It is the deepest part of its body. It is the reason it runs, hides, fights, eats, and sleeps. So if a small, warm creature made of fear and instinct looks at a car moving at 40 miles per hour and decides that the car is the safer choice, then it knows something I do not. It knows what is behind it. It knows what being caught by that thing would mean. The animals were not all running toward the river. Some of them looked at the woods. Then they looked at my car. To them, the tires were mercy. I was crying by then. Not the quiet kind of crying people do in movies. I was making ugly sounds. My face was wet. My breathing was uneven, and I could barely see through the tears. There was nobody there to watch me, but I still felt ashamed. My hands were shaking so badly that I could no longer keep the car steady. Finally, I pulled onto the shoulder. I switched on the hazard lights. Then I turned off the engine. The sudden silence felt wrong. I sat there with both hands locked around the wheel, breathing hard. I could not keep being the thing that killed them. I could not do it for one more minute. That was when I noticed how quiet the forest had become. I grew up near those woods. A forest in July is never silent. There should have been crickets, frogs, insects, and night birds. There should have been leaves moving, wings beating, and small things scratching through the brush. There was nothing. Even the air seemed still. Then I heard footsteps in the trees on the left side of the road. I knew they were footsteps. They were too slow and regular to be falling branches. One step, a long pause, then another. The pauses were wrong. Whatever was walking did not move like an animal chasing prey. It moved slowly, as if it had no reason to hurry. Each step sounded heavy enough to shake the ground, but soft enough that I knew it was trying to be careful. Then I heard a second sound. It came from high above the ground, 30 feet up, maybe 40. A branch bent. There was a slow wooden creak. Then the branch eased back into place. A few seconds later, another branch farther along the tree line bent in the same way. Then another. The sound moved through the forest beside the road. Something was traveling among the trees. Something tall enough to touch the upper branches. I did not understand that sound at the time. I understand it now. I do not remember deciding to leave the car. One moment I was sitting behind the wheel, and the next I was standing on the road beside the open driver's door. Maybe I wanted to hear better. Maybe fear had made me stupid. The red hazard lights flashed around me, lighting the pavement and the lower parts of the trees. A squirrel came running out of the darkness. It ran directly across my shoe. It did not avoid me. It did not look up. For one brief second, I felt the tiny weight of its body pass over my foot. That was what forced me back into the car. The squirrel had not treated me like a person. It had not treated me like a threat. To it, I was just part of the ground. I was terrain. I slammed the door, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road. That was the only time I stopped all night. The animals became larger after that. Deer began leaping out of the trees. They came across the road in long, wild jumps, their legs stretched and their eyes wide. One struck the front corner of my hood. The impact made the whole car shake. The deer spun, hit the road, and rolled. I screamed and hit the brakes. Before the car fully stopped, the deer struggled back to its feet. One of its legs was bent in the wrong direction. It should not have been able to stand. It ran anyway. It crossed the rest of the road on 3 good legs and dragged the broken one behind it. The pain did not matter. Nothing mattered except getting away from the trees. A coyote appeared next. It ran beside a rabbit for almost 100 feet. Predator and prey, shoulder to shoulder. Neither looked at the other. Neither tried to attack. Whatever was behind them had erased the rules they normally lived by. At one point, I leaned over the steering wheel and looked through the windshield at the narrow strip of sky above the road. It was full of birds. I could only see them when they crossed the stars, but there were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. It was 1 in the morning. Every bird was flying in the same direction, to the right. By then, I was no longer braking for the small animals. I am ashamed to admit that, but I promised myself I would write everything. I had driven over so many that I could no longer feel each one separately over the vibration of the engine and the road. I only knew when I hit something larger, because the wheel would pull or jump in my hands. I looked into the rearview mirror once. The road behind me was dotted with shapes as far as the red taillights reached. Some were animals I had hit. Others had already been there before I arrived. My first thought was not sadness. It was that all of the bodies faced the same way. Even the dead animals were pointing away from the left side of the road. Then the dog came out of the forest. It was a golden retriever. Its fur shone pale in the headlights, and it had a red collar around its neck. A leash dragged behind it, whipping across the road. The dog ran with the same blind panic as everything else. I keep thinking about the leash. I keep wondering what had been holding the other end. Every time my mind starts imagining it, I force myself to stop. About a mile later, I saw a car parked on the opposite shoulder. Its hazard lights were flashing. Its headlights were on. The driver's door stood open. There was nobody inside. There was nobody on the road. There was nobody standing near the trees. I did not slow down. I looked straight ahead and kept driving. That was when I finally thought about the shape of the land. Everything had been moving from left to right. On the left side of the road was the state forest. Miles and miles of trees, hills, and empty land. On the right side was the river valley. The road followed the edge between them. The movement of the animals had stayed beside me for nearly the entire drive. That meant whatever they were running from was not standing in one place. It was moving through the forest. It had a direction. It was keeping pace with me. I was around 5 minutes from the end of the woods when I saw it. I did not see it through the windshield. I saw it in the rearview mirror. Something crossed the road behind me. It was near the far edge of the red light from my taillights. Everything below its upper body was only darkness and shape. I never saw what it walked on. I never saw its face. I saw the antlers. They entered the red light first. They left it last. The thing moved from the ditch on the left side of the road to the trees on the right. That is a wide distance. 2 lanes, 2 shoulders. I had driven that road my entire life, so I knew exactly how much space it had crossed. The antlers were wider than the road, and they were moving, not swaying like branches in wind. They bent. Antlers are bone. Bone does not fold. These bent at joints. In the red light, they did not look like antlers at all. They looked like arms, long, thin arms growing from the top of something I could not see. I know that sounds impossible. It is still the only description I have. When the thing reached the trees on the right side, it did not crash into them. The antlers folded inward, one section at a time. They pulled close to its body the way a person pulls in their arms when stepping through a narrow doorway. Then, the thing disappeared into the forest. The road behind me was empty again. That was when I finally understood the sound I had heard while sitting on the shoulder. The high branches had bent and slowly returned to place because the creature had been touching them, holding them, moving them out of its way. 5 minutes later, I reached the end of the woods. Everything stopped at once. It was as sudden as turning off a faucet. The road opened into farms and scattered houses. Crickets filled the air. Frogs called from the wet fields. A raccoon stood on top of someone's trash can beside the road. When my headlights reached it, the raccoon froze. Then it jumped down and ran away from the car. I began laughing. I laughed so hard that I almost started crying again. That was a normal animal. That was an animal afraid of headlights. That was how the world was supposed to work. I reached home without seeing anything else. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and walked from room to room, turning on every light. I tried to sleep, but I could not. I opened a map on my computer and traced the route. The state forest was on the left. The river valley was on the right. Every living thing had been moving toward the valley. The valley narrowed as it came down from the hills. It led directly into town. I live in that town. So does everything that made it across the road. What I cannot stop thinking about is the fact that I never saw the creature catch anything. Not once. There were thousands of terrified animals running ahead of it, but the thing did not chase them. It walked. It took slow steps. It moved through the forest without rushing. It held the branches out of its path. A predator does not move that way. An animal that hunts, runs, stalks, or waits, that thing was not hunting. It was driving them. You do not empty an entire forest because you are hungry. You empty it because you want everything to move somewhere else. Every animal on that road had gone in one direction, down into the valley, into town. The neighborhood dogs began barking around 3 in the morning. They have not stopped. This morning, after the sun came up, I made myself go outside and check the car. There was dirt on the sides and something dark beneath the tires that I refused to examine closely. The cold fries were still sitting on the passenger seat. I carried them up the driveway and threw them in the trash. It felt like a normal thing to do. For a few seconds, I wanted to believe that I was a normal person having a normal morning. Then I looked at the yard. My bird feeder was full. Usually, birds empty half of it soon after sunrise. Nothing had touched it. No birds sat on the fence. No insects moved through the grass. A squirrel was sitting in the center of my lawn. It was not eating. It was not moving. It was facing the tree line behind my house. I watched it for several minutes before coming inside. That was more than an hour ago. It is still there. I am standing at the kitchen window now, looking at it while I write this. Its body is completely still. Its tail lies flat behind it. It has not turned its head once. The only time I saw an animal sit that still was last night, beside the state road. It happened just before the forest became silent. Just before I heard the footsteps. Story 5. The Vesper 7 was called a spacecraft, but that word made it sound cleaner and more advanced than it really was. It looked less like a machine made for exploring the stars and more like a long, rusted metal worm crawling through space. Its outer shell was scarred, dark, and uneven, as if it had been built from pieces taken from several dead ships and forced together. Every few hours, the hull groaned as the temperature outside changed. The sound traveled through the walls like the cry of some huge animal trapped inside the metal. Pipes shook in narrow service tunnels. Loose panels rattled. The air recycling system coughed and wheezed without rest, struggling to keep the crew alive. Sometimes it made a deep, choking sound, like a sick lung trying to pull in one more breath. Silas stood in front of the main viewport and stared into the darkness. His reflection floated on the glass, pale and faint against the endless field of stars. He was a large man with broad shoulders, rough hands, and a face that still carried a small amount of hope. He had spent most of his life working with machines in the lower sectors of Earth, repairing old engines and broken ventilation systems for people who could barely afford clean water. Now, according to the mission, he was 6 months away from Mars. He often imagined the moment when the ship would land. He pictured the airlock doors opening and red dust moving across the ground outside. He imagined stepping down from the landing ramp, his boots pressing into Martian soil while cameras recorded everything. He wanted to believe that his name would become part of history. Silas talked about Mars constantly. He called it the new frontier. He spoke about building homes under glass domes, growing food in red soil, and creating a place where humanity could begin again. Earth was dying slowly behind them. The oceans had turned dark near most of the cities. The skies were covered in chemical clouds. Entire regions had become too hot to live in. Mars, at least in the stories shown during training, offered hope. It was not a perfect hope. Everyone knew the first colonists would suffer. They would work long hours, live in small rooms, and survive on strict food supplies. Some would die. But Silas believed their pain would mean something. He believed they would leave behind a future. Elias sat in the navigator's chair a few feet behind him. His hands rested together over his stomach. His body was still, almost unnaturally so. He did not look at the stars. He did not look at Mars on the navigation display. He did not look at Silas. Instead, he watched the ship's internal readings. The screen showed oxygen levels, pressure, temperature, and power use. But there were other measurements Silas did not understand. Thin lines moved across the display in slow, steady waves. They rose and fell like a heartbeat. Symbols appeared and vanished beside them, written in a language that did not look human. Silas had asked about those symbols once. Elias told him they were part of a new navigation system. Silas believed him. "Quiet tonight," Silas said. Elias did not answer immediately. Silas continued staring out of the viewport. "Do you ever think about the first day?" he asked. "When we finally get there?" Elias looked at him. "The first day of what?" Silas smiled, though his reflection looked tired. "Come on, Eli. Mars, the landing. The first time we step outside." Elias turned his eyes back to the screen. "We won't be stepping outside." Silas laughed softly. The sound was nervous, though he tried to hide it. "You mean because of the pressure suits?" "No." Silas waited for him to explain. Elias did not. Silas finally turned away from the viewport. "You know what I mean," he said. "The first breath after we leave the ship. Not real outside air, obviously, but the air in the colony. Air made there. Recycled there. You don't think that'll feel different?" "It won't be air," Elias said. His voice was flat. "And there won't be a colony." Silas stared at him. For a few seconds, the only sound in the room came from the life support system coughing behind the walls. Then, Silas smiled again. He had spent enough time with Elias to know the man had a strange sense of humor. At least he had always assumed it was humor. "The psychological pressure is getting to you." Silas said. That's what this is, right? You're trying to keep me from getting too excited. Elias said nothing. Silas walked away from the viewport. I get it. Colonization is a heavy burden. We're carrying the future of the species and all that. It isn't a burden, Elias replied. He slowly stood from the navigator's chair. It's an offering. The lights in the control room went out. Silas froze. A moment later, weak violet light began to pulse inside the walls. It did not come from the ceiling lamps. It moved beneath the metal panels, glowing through thin cracks like light under skin. The color grew brighter, then faded, then returned again. The pulses followed the same rhythm as the strange lines on Elias's screen. Silas looked around. What happened to the lights? Elias faced him. The ship is waking up. A cold feeling moved through Silas's chest. What does that mean? The violet light spread down the corridor outside the control room. It moved in waves, revealing shapes beneath the walls. Thick cords pressed against the inner panels. They twisted and tightened like muscles. Silas stepped closer to the emergency controls. Did the reactor fail? There is no reactor. Silas looked back at Elias. There has to be. No. What powers the ship, then? Elias tilted his head. Us, the Vesper 7, had never been a normal spacecraft. It had not been made in a factory above Earth. No workers had built its frame. No engineers had designed the systems beneath its hull. The metal, wires, and control panels were only a shell placed over something far older. The true Vesper 7 was alive. It belonged to a type of creature known as a Weaver-class biomass. Humanity had first encountered one beyond the outer colonies, though the public had never been told. It was not a species in the usual sense. It did not build ships because it was the ship. Its body could grow into different shapes. It could copy metal, glass, cables, and computer systems well enough to fool human eyes. It did not move through space using engines. Instead, it folded distance around itself, pulling faraway places close before moving through them. It did not travel to explore, it traveled to eat. Elias was not a colonist. He was not a navigator either. He was a shepherd. Years earlier, he had been taken from a transport station near the outer rim. The Weaver had opened his mind, removed parts of his personality, and replaced them with a living network of foreign cells. Enough of Elias had been left behind to walk, speak, and remember being human. Not enough remained to resist. The creature used him to bring others aboard. He found the desperate, the hopeful, and the people with nowhere else to go. He showed them false mission papers. He gave them training. He told them they had been selected to help build a new world. Some volunteered. Others were chosen through the draft. Silas had been one of those. Elias had obeyed because he believed obedience would keep him alive. The Weaver had promised that if he continued feeding it, his body would remain his own. He would not be dissolved. He would not become part of the walls. That promise had carried him through every harvest. Silas took another step back. The wall beside him made a wet cracking sound. A line appeared between two metal panels. Clear liquid pushed through it and began running down the surface. At first, Silas thought it was water. Then, he smelled it. The liquid gave off the sharp scent of electricity mixed with something sweet and rotten. It reminded him of flowers left too long in standing water. "What is that?" he whispered. The liquid thickened as it moved down the wall. It clung to the metal like clear slime. Elias walked toward the main console. "We aren't going to Mars, Silas." Silas's face went pale, Stop! There's no colony. Stop talking. Mars is a graveyard. Silas shook his head. No, we use it because people want to believe it offers another chance. Elias placed one hand on the console. The surface softened beneath his fingers. His skin pushed into it. The console accepted his hand like warm flesh. Silas watched in horror. Mission Control has been speaking to us every day, he said. We have coordinates. We have landing plans. We have supply reports. Memories, Elias replied. What? Data is just another form of memory. The Weaver gives you what you expect to see. Silas's breathing quickened. That doesn't make sense. The messages were never sent from Earth. I spoke to Commander Vale. No, you didn't. I saw her face. You saw what the ship wanted you to see. Silas shook his head harder. He thought about every message he had received since departure. He remembered Mission Control giving them daily updates. He remembered technicians explaining minor problems with the navigation system. He remembered Blair. Not a girlfriend, not a wife, just a woman he had known in the lower sectors who had promised to wait for him. He had received a video from her 3 weeks after launch. She had cried while telling him she was proud. Now he wondered whether the video had been real. Earth knows where we are, Silas said. No, they tracked the ship. They think the Vesper 7 was destroyed during departure. Silas's mouth opened, but no words came out. Elias moved his hand deeper into the console. The ship shuddered. Its outer plates shifted against one another. The sound was enormous, a violent grinding of metal against something soft and wet. The floor shook beneath Silas's boots. He grabbed the edge of a chair. What are you doing? Preparing it. For what? To feed. The walls began to change. Metal panels bent outward. Screws pulled themselves free and disappeared into soft tissue hidden beneath. Cables twisted together like worms. The ceiling lowered slightly as thick muscles moved above it. Silas stumbled backward. You're lying. Elias turned toward him. His eyes had begun to change. The pupils widened until the color around them disappeared. Blackness filled both eyes, but it was not smooth. Shapes moved inside them, forming strange patterns with too many sides. The Weaver needs carbon, Elias said. Blood, bone, fat, all of that is useful. Silas pressed himself against the wall, but what it truly enjoys is thought. Elias stepped closer. It feeds on the mind while it dies. Silas stared into his eyes. The fear sends signals through the brain. Memories open. The mind struggles to protect itself. The Weaver loves that struggle. Elias smiled faintly. It loves the moment you understand. The ship lurched. Gravity shifted sideways. Silas was pulled off his feet and thrown across the control room. He struck the wall hard enough to force the air from his lungs. But the wall was no longer metal. It was warm. It gave way beneath his body, then slowly pushed him back. Silas placed both hands against it and felt a pulse under the surface. He jerked away. A group of thin white hairs pushed through the wall near his face. They moved like tiny fingers, touching his cheek and neck. Silas slapped at them. They wrapped around his wrist. He pulled free and crawled across the floor. I didn't volunteer, he said. His voice cracked. Elias stopped a few feet away. I know. I was drafted. Yes, I didn't want this mission. I was a mechanic. I fixed heating systems in the lower sectors. I know. I have a family. You had a family. Silas's face twisted with fear and anger. Why me? Elias looked toward the softening floor beneath him. Because an unwilling mind gives more. Silas tried to stand, but his boots sank into the surface. The floor had become dark and wet. Small holes opened around his feet. They tightened around his ankles. He pulled one leg free, but the other sank deeper. Elias watched without helping.